This is the Grammar Literary Terms review for your final exam. The directions for this portion of your final exam were to match the part of speech or part of a sentence to its definition. I'm going to explain to you why all of the correct answers are correct. For number 1, noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. Noun is one of the basic parts of speech that we learned at the beginning of the school year. And if you remember any of your Schoolhouse Rock videos, this is super helpful for you when you're studying. A pronoun takes the place of a noun. And if you're looking at the word pronoun, noun is actually within the word pronoun. So if you can remember pronoun using the word noun, you can understand that it takes the place of a noun in the definition. A verb, for letter C, is an action word. Also one of the basic parts of speech that we talked about at the very beginning of the school year. An adjective describes nouns and pronouns. And while that may be pretty tricky to remember, adverb has a trick to it so that you can remember the difference between the two. An adverb describes adjectives, adverbs, and verbs. And you can remember this because the AD in adjectives adverb the whole word and just verbs itself. So it's easier to remember that adjectives describe nouns and pronouns when you break down the word adverb itself. Moving on to the second section. An interjection shows excitement and emotion, and you may remember the Schoolhouse Rock song, "Interjections show excitement and emotion." That is one of the easiest and catchiest ways to remember this because it is such a catchy song. For B, the conjunction connects clauses, and even though that might be difficult to remember, just remember that the word that starts with C matches the definitions that start with C in connects and clauses. A preposition is arguably one of the hardest ones to remember because it indicates a relationship between words. We also call prepositions direction verbs or anything that a squirrel can do to a tree. Remember, those are in, over, up, below, beneath, through, all of those directional words. A subject is the part of the sentence that includes the noun, and the predicate includes the verb. The easiest way to remember this is listening to the song Mr. Morton once again, with Mr. Morton was the subject of the sentence and what the predicate says he does. If you're having a hard time remembering that, my suggestion is to definitely check out that song again because it will help you to remember. The next set of words that we had to match together for this part of the review starts with characters. You probably guessed this one because characters are people in a book, play, or movie. And that's a really easy tactic for test taking to be able to use the process of elimination. So for one of the more difficult words, characters was probably an easy one to match right away. Fiction is a genre of literature that is fake or untrue. The easiest way to remember this is that fiction starts with the same letter as fake. Plot includes exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. And we know this because think of the word plot in plot diagram. And I ask you later in the same assessment to be able to draw the plot diagram. And you use that information later in your final exam as well. Rhyme is words that sound familiar, such as AABB is an example rhyme scheme, and you may remember that from poetry. Additionally, the setting is the time and place of a story, and that is one of the basic words that's probably also relatively easy to complete right away. Next is tone. If you remember tone being the author's attitude, we've talked about this throughout the school year, that if you can remember tone and attitude, both starting with T, that will help you a lot to remember this definition matching section. The theme is the moral message of a story, and it has to be universal for it to be a theme. It's the moral of the story and the lesson that they want you to learn. We talked about a lot of these. Sophomore year, we talk about the This I Believe essays that you read at the beginning of the school year. And we also talked about theme a lot with the children's literature books in the reading class. We talked about them with the short stories in the freshman class. And we've talked about them throughout the junior and senior class with regard to Beowulf and some of the short stories in there as well. To remember mood, don't forget that mood is about how you feel. So while tone is author's attitude, remember the T's, mood is about you, how the reader feels, how you, the reader, feels, and it's how the author intends for you to feel. A simile is a comparison that uses like or as, and a metaphor does not use like or as. Those are just simple memorization. So if you can remind yourself in some way that a simile uses like or as, I like to think of it as simile uses as because it ends with S, and a metaphor does not because there is no M in like or as. That's an easy way for me to personally remember that, if that helps you. A hyperbole is an exaggeration, such as I had to walk 1,000 miles. Imagery appeals to the senses and creates a mental image. Hopefully, this is a simple one for you to complete because imagery and image literally in the definition. So that one should just be a freebie. Foreshadowing is a hint at what will happen in the future. And we talk all the time about how foreshadowing and future both start with F, if that helps you within the definition to remember that. And flashback is a scene from back in the past. So even though that also starts with F, we have the back in the definition and flashback in the word. Irony is the opposite of what you expect, and we know there are many different types of that. For the backside, the directions were to use the listed words to fill in what terms match the examples, and spelling counts since I'm giving you the definitions, and I'm giving you the words. For number 26, she is pretty as a picture is a simile. Again, we see this as, and it's a comparison between she, meaning some girl that we are speaking of, being like a picture. Therefore, we have simile as the answer. When we say he is a statue, there is no like or as, but we are still comparing he, the man in this sentence, to a statue, making this a metaphor. I had to walk uphill both ways to school. While it helps to hear me say that with the type of sarcastic tone, hyperbole is definitely evident here because you definitely can't walk uphill both directions when you're going to and from school. That is hyperbole. Big exaggeration. The wind whispered and trees punched the air. We have personification because trees here are supposed to be punching the air, which is a human trait. And the wind whispered, which again is something that only people do. The man brought his date flowers to make her feel better, but she had an allergic reaction. By process of elimination, we're left with irony, but this is correct because he tries to bring her flowers to make her feel better, and we expect that it will, but instead she has an allergic reaction, and so the opposite becomes true and she feels worse. For the section following that, we have V for Vendetta was very valid, valuable, and victorious. And that is alliteration because we have this repetition of initial consonant sounds, which are any letters of the alphabet that are not A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y vowels, but are the rest of the letters of the alphabet. That is alliteration. Holes is about Stanley, but a scene about his great-grandfather is a flashback. Here we can see it's a flashback because it would be a scene in the past if it's regarding his great-great-grandfather. He is likely no longer living. In Romeo and Juliet, the apothecary warns that the poison will kill Romeo, and we know that this is foreshadowing because it has not yet happened in the story. It is something that is letting us know that the poison will likely kill Romeo sometime later, giving us a hint at a future event in the story. The ocean waves crashed, the sea was sparkling blue, and it was peaceful. This creates imagery. It may be the most difficult one to identify, but it definitely paints a picture between the waves crashing, appealing to the sound, the sea is sparkling blue, appealing to sight, and a feeling of peace. Those all relate to a sense of imagery and appeal to your five senses. Lastly, jumbo shrimp, student teacher, pretty ugly, and screaming mind are all oxymorons because they contradict each other. Finally, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution are your plot diagrams. Hopefully, this was helpful for you in the explanation of each of your answers. Please let me know if you have any further questions before your final exam. Good luck studying!